No creature ever escaped the Sand Maw until a human smiled and walked in willingly. Tarvik Prime was a planet of storms and stone. Its skies were always dark, filled with red clouds that growled like beasts, mountains cracked open like old bones, and rivers glowed with strange blue light. No human had ever walked its surface until now. The Zarketh people ruled this world. They were tall, strong, and full of pride. Even the smallest Zarketh warrior stood over 8 feet tall. But among them, one stood even taller, stronger, and deadlier than all. Her name was Velyazana. She was a legend, even among her kind, over 10 feet tall. Her armor made of black bone, her eyes like burning gold. She had never been defeated, never been touched, never been loved. Zarketh males feared her. They said she was cursed by the old gods. Some believed she was not born but carved from the mountain by lightning. No male dared speak to her, let alone stand by her side. But Velyazana did not care. She walked alone, fought alone, lived alone. It was the only way she knew. Then came the human. His name was Jack Carter. He arrived in a ship that looked like a broken shell. The landing shook the ground near the stone fields. Velyazana was the first to arrive, her spear glowing with heat. She expected a threat, maybe another machine from the stars. But what stepped out shocked her. He was small, barely taller than her leg. He wore soft armor and had no weapons in hand. His skin was light, his hair was dark, and his face was open calm. He looked up at her, and he smiled, not a mocking smile, not a nervous one. It was friendly. No one had ever smiled at her like that, not even her own kind. "Hello," Jack said, his voice carrying through the stormy air. Velyazana did not move. She tightened her grip on her spear, unsure what to make of him. He raised both hands, a sign of peace among humans. "I come in peace, big lady," he said, laughing softly. "I think I landed in the wrong neighborhood." Velyazana blinked. The human was strange, bold, but not foolish. She didn't speak, not yet. Instead, she turned and walked away, expecting him to flee. But he followed her, not close enough to offend her, but close enough to say, "I'm not afraid." For days, Jack wandered near the stone fields. He set up a small camp, collected samples, and fixed his broken ship. Velyazana watched him from a distance, curious, confused, even entertained. He talked to himself, sang strange songs, and once tried to cook Zarketh meat and nearly passed out from the smell. She almost laughed. Then came the firestorm, winds strong enough to tear trees from the ground, flames falling from the sky. Jack's camp would not survive. Velyazana moved fast. She found him trying to tie his tent to a rock. She grabbed him by the waist, lifted him like a sack, and ran. She carried him to a cave where no storm could reach. She dropped him gently, then turned to leave. But Jack stopped her. "Wait," he said, breathing hard. "You saved me." Velyazana nodded once, still silent, still watching. Jack looked up at her massive form. "You're amazing. You know that," he said. No one back home would believe this. She stared, unsure what to say. He wasn't mocking her. He meant it, every word. "I think I'll stay a while," he said, smiling again. "Tarvok's rough, but I've met someone interesting." Velyazana's heart, which had never known fear or love, beat a little faster. No male of her kind had ever dared approach her, but the small, soft-spoken human had done it without blinking. Something had changed in the silence of the cave. With firestorms raging outside, a new story had begun, a story that would shake Tarvik Prime to its core. And it all started with a smile. The firestorms ended after 2 days. But something had already changed inside Velyazana. She was not used to being watched without fear, not used to being thanked, or smiled at, or seen as more than a weapon. But that human, Jack Carter, had done all of that in just a few days. Most Zarketh would have chased him off or broken his bones for standing too close. Velyazana had expected to do the same. Instead, she found herself watching him from the shadows like a curious child. Jack did not leave after the storm. He fixed his little camp, cleaned his equipment, and even built a fire pit. His work was clumsy, loud, and slow, but it was full of effort. Velyazana stood on a nearby cliff, her tall frame still as stone. Jack knew she was there. He always did. He never ran, never hid. Sometimes he would wave at her or talk to the sky, knowing she was listening. Still not talking to me, huh? He said one evening, stirring a pot of thick blue soup. It's okay, I get it. You're the strong, silent type. Veliazana didn't answer, but her eyes narrowed slightly. That soup was going to poison him. A few hours later, Jack crawled out of his tent, pale and sweating. He groaned, holding his stomach. I may have made a mistake, he mumbled, collapsing onto the grass. Veliazana sighed, shook her head, and jumped down from the rocks. She picked him up like a lost cub and carried him to the river. She knew the plants nearby that could cure mild poison, crushed leaves, warm water, and some heat from her armor. That was enough. Jack woke up with his head resting on her leg. He looked up, eyes blinking in confusion. You again, he said weakly. You really don't want me dead, huh? Veliazana didn't speak, but she didn't move away either. She looked down at him, the strange little creature with a soft heart and a loud mouth. He smiled again, even while in pain. Thanks, mountain girl, he whispered. You saved me twice now. Kind of a record. The next morning, Jack was walking again. Veliazana followed him without hiding. The silence between them was no longer cold, it was calm. Like two warriors who didn't need words. Days passed, and the Zarketh began to notice. From a distance, they watched the human walk beside the Jantas. They whispered to each other, shocked and angry. No Zarketh male had ever earned her attention, and now this thing, this outsider, was walking beside her like an equal. One evening, while Jack was sketching a strange red flower in his notebook, a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see a Zarketh warrior, tall and broad, holding a heavy war axe. His name was Gertal, and his pride was sharp as his blade. Human, Gertal growled. You insult our ways, you shame our blood. Jack stood slowly, brushing dirt off his pants. He looked up, trying not to laugh at how ridiculously tall the warrior was. Good evening to you too, he said. Can I help you with something? Gertal pointed the axe at him. You will fight, now, or leave forever. Veliazana stepped forward, her voice deep and full of warning. No, she said, her first word in days. He is under my protection, Gertal snarled. Then, you are soft, without another word. Jack stepped between them. I accept, he said, surprising both aliens. I'll fight him. Veliazana's eyes widened. She moved to stop him, but Jack held up a hand. It's okay, he said softly. Let me try. The duel was held in the open plain. Zarketh warriors circled, growling and shouting. Expecting to see blood, Gertal charged first, swinging fast and wide. Jack ducked under the swing, rolled, and threw dirt into the warrior's eyes. The crowd gasped, not from honor, but from surprise. Jack used a small stun device to shock Gertal's leg. He used no blade, no sharp weapon, only speed, tricks, and his brain. Again and again, he dodged, and dodged, until Gertal was too tired to swing. Then Jack did the unthinkable. He walked up to the warrior and offered him water. Gertal stared at the bottle, confused, his chest rising with heavy breaths. I don't want to hurt anyone, Jack said. I just want to stay, learn, and survive. The crowd fell silent. Veliazana stepped forward, standing beside Jack. Her presence told the others, this human is mine to protect. For the first time in her life, she was not alone, and for the first time in his, Jack was respected by a people who once called him nothing. The stars above Tarvik Prime flickered, unaware that history had changed, all because one human dared to smile back. No one on Tarvik Prime spoke of peace, not in the warrior clans, not in the blood pits, and never on the stone fields. But after the human's strange victory, there was silence, a silence louder than thunder, heavier than war. Veliazana had never stood beside anyone after a duel. She had only ever stood over fallen enemies, but now she stood beside Jack Carter, a human with quick feet, strange tools, and a heart full of fire. The other Zarketh warriors did not cheer. They didn't know how. They had never seen a battle end without blood. Jack didn't smile that time. He was sweating, shaking, and barely standing, but his eyes met Veliazana's, and something passed between them. Not words, not even thoughts, just a silent understanding. We're not done yet. The next day, no one came to challenge Jack, not because they accepted him but because they didn't know how to fight what he represented. Zarketh culture was strength, dominance, tradition. Jack was none of those things. He was soft, clever, and curious. He asked questions, studied things, and talked to plants like they would answer back. Velyazana followed him now, not to protect him but to understand him. One morning, she saw him staring at a cracked rock. Near the river, he brushed away dust and revealed markings, old ones, carved deep into the stone. Language, he whispered, then louder, Velyazana, look. She stepped forward, brow furrowed. The symbols were not Zarketh, but they felt familiar, ancient. Jack's hands moved quickly as he traced the lines. They're not just words, he said. They're warnings. Velyazana knelt beside him. He smelled like sweat and soil. But his focus never broke. Beneath this land, he said, tapping a strange curved symbol. Something sleeps. Velyazana stared at the stone, the crack glowing faintly blue beneath their feet. Her people told old stories of weapons, buried by the gods, machines too dangerous to destroy, stories meant to scare children and silence questions. But now she wasn't sure they were just stories. Jack stood and wiped his hands on his pants. We need to see what's below, he said. If this planet has secrets, we can't ignore them. Velyazana didn't answer. Instead, she turned and began walking. Jack followed without hesitation. They traveled for hours, past the smoking cliffs and through the whispering caves. At the edge of the Black Ridge, they found it, a wide, flat stone door half buried, forgotten, waiting. It took both of them to move it. Velyazana pushed with brute strength. Jack guided her with logic and caution. When the stone slid open, a wave of cold air poured out, not natural cold, but deep, ancient, lifeless cold. Jack turned on a light, the beam shining into the black, metal walls, smooth and humming with power, stretched below like a throat leading to the core. They entered slowly. Velyazana's armor echoed in the dark. Jack's boots crunched on dust that hadn't been disturbed for thousands of years. The walls were covered in more symbols, more warnings. Jack translated where he could. Do not awaken the bound one, he read softly. It will not know mercy. They reached a chamber huge, round, and humming with energy. In the center was a cage of light, floating above a pit. Inside it, something moved, huge, slow, breathing. Velyazana stepped closer. Her warrior's instinct screamed at her to run, to burn the chamber down and bury it forever. Jack's voice broke the silence. This isn't a tomb, he said. It's a prison. Something inside the cage opened an eye, not fully, just a flicker, a flash of red light that stung their skin. Jack stumbled back, heart racing. Velyazana raised her spear, ready to fight, but the cage held. For now, they didn't speak on the way back to the surface. There was nothing to say, only one truth left between them. They had found something that should not exist, and something deep below Tarvik Prime now knew it had been found. Jack Carter couldn't sleep. Back on Earth, he used to fall asleep to the sound of soft rain or the low hum of city lights, but Tarvik Prime offered no peace. Only wind that screamed through stone canyons and skies that never stopped glowing red. Still, it wasn't the weather keeping him awake. It was the eye. That single red eye they saw below the surface, the thing inside the cage. It hadn't moved again. Not since that one glance, but Jack felt like it was watching, even now, even through layers of rock. He lay on the ground, hands behind his head, staring at the stars. Velyazana sat nearby, as still as a statue, her back against a broken pillar. She hadn't spoken since they left the ruins. Something about what they saw had touched her in a way nothing else ever had. Jack broke the silence. You've seen something like that before, haven't you? Velyazana didn't answer at first. Then finally, she spoke, her voice low and steady. When I was a hatchling, the elders spoke of the Bound One. They said it was a god that lost its mind, a war being that devoured entire clans. No one believed it was real. Jack sat up slowly. Well, it's real, and it's still alive. She nodded, and now it is aware. The next day, they returned to the ruins. Jack insisted on going back, not to fight, not to dig, but to learn. I need to understand how that thing works, he said. If it wakes up, we need a way to stop it. Velyazana didn't like it. Every part of her screamed to destroy the ruins, to bury it all under fire and stone. But something about Jack's calm determination kept her close. This time, they brought tools, scanners, light packs, and a small hovering drone Jack built from scrap. The deeper they went, the stronger the humming grew. It wasn't just sound, it was pressure, vibration. Like the planet's heart was beating out of rhythm in the lower chamber. Jack approached a wall covered in ancient control glyphs. He studied them carefully, fingers brushing lightly over the metal. Whoever built this place, he said, they weren't Zarketh, to precise. 2. Engineered. Velizana looked around, noticing the strange shapes and the smooth walls. They were older than any structure on Tarvik Prime, older than even Zarketh memory. Jack activated one of the glyphs. Light flooded the room, and the floating cage above the pit began to shift. Velizana stepped forward, alarmed. Turn it off, she growled. I'm trying, Jack said, his hands flying over the symbols. I didn't think it would. A loud hum filled the air. The cage pulsed once, twice, then steadied. Then something whispered, not in sound, not in voice, but in their minds. A deep, alien thought crawled through Jack's brain like ice. Free me. Jack gasped and stepped back. Velizana was already in motion, smashing the glyph panel with one swing of her spear. The lights died, the hum vanished, and the whispering stopped, but the feeling did not. Something ancient had touched them, and it would not forget. On the way back to the surface, Jack walked slower. Velizana kept glancing at him, not with anger, but with concern. You heard it, he said finally. Velizana nodded once. I did, she said, and it hurt us too. That night, they did not speak again. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there were no words strong enough to explain what they had felt. The Bound One was not just a danger to Tarvik Prime, it was a danger to the galaxy, and now, for the first time in many lifetimes, it was waking up. Vetra didn't like the quiet, not this kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of deep space or the stillness before a battle. This was something different, a silence full of weight, like memory pressing down on her bones. The ship drifted in orbit. Above a dead moon, they weren't hiding, but they weren't moving either. Jace had powered everything down, except life support. He said they needed a moment to breathe. But Vetra had never learned how to do that. She stood at the back of the ship, staring out the viewport. No stars were visible here, only the pale gray of the moon below. It reminded her of a battlefield long ago. She had stood over the bodies of 20 fallen warriors, all strong, all proud, all gone. Behind her, Jace was quiet too. He sat with a data tablet in his hands, but he hadn't touched it in minutes. He was watching her, but not the way others did, not with fear or awe or calculation. He was just watching. She finally turned, her voice low. Why don't you ask what you want to ask? Jace blinked once, then nodded slowly. What did they do to you? Vetra didn't answer at first. She walked to the center of the ship and sat down. Heavy and slow, her armor creaked, her shoulders tight. When I was 7, she said, my planet was taken. The High Council came, said they needed warriors. They picked the largest children, the strongest, the most aggressive. I was the first one chosen. She looked down at her hands, massive and scarred. They gave us injections, she continued. Things that made us grow faster, stronger. They trained us in the dark, with no names, only numbers. We didn't sleep, we didn't laugh, we didn't play, we only fought. Jace didn't interrupt. His hands were still, his eyes focused on her. I was better than the rest, she said, voice harder now. They started calling me Unit Zero because I didn't need rest between matches. One day, I stopped losing. She looked up, and her eyes were cold again, so they stopped giving me partners. I started training alone, fighting alone, winning alone. Jace spoke gently. You were a weapon, not a child. Vetra nodded once. I didn't even have a name until I left the labs. An alien general saw me break a tank with my fists. He named me Vetra. What does it mean? She looked away. It means trophy in his language. Jace didn't speak for a while. Then he said, I had a sister. Vetra looked at him, surprised by the change. She was born sick. He continued, couldn't walk, couldn't breathe without help, but she smiled every day. She told stories painted on the walls, made us laugh. Vetra listened, silent, but not cold. One day Earth was attacked, Jace said, his voice quieter. We had to run, but she couldn't. I stayed with her. He looked down at his hands now, as if they were carrying something he couldn't drop. She died in my arms, he said, still smiling. Vetra leaned forward slightly. Why are you telling me this? Because, Jace said, meeting her eyes again, you're not the only one who carries chains. They made you a weapon. Mine was helpless, and I still couldn't save her. Vetra's jaw tightened. But you chose to stay, she said. That matters. Jace gave a small smile. You chose to leave. He said, that matters too. The silence returned, but it felt different now, not heavy, not cold. It was the kind of silence shared between people who had seen too much and still kept going. Then the console beeped, an incoming message encrypted. Bouncing between systems, Jace moved to check it, but Vetra stood first. No, she said. Let me. She walked to the screen and touched the controls. The message opened. A single sentence flashed on the display. You are not the only ones. Hunting the cage, Jace frowned. What does that mean? Before Vetra could answer, alarms lit up across the dashboard. Enemy ships, 3 of them. Uncloaking from deep shadow. No symbols, no warnings, only weapons, armed and locking. Vetra reached for her harness, her voice steady again. Get to the controls. Jace moved fast, powering up the engines. Do you think it's the council? No, she said, her eyes hard and bright. This is something else. As the ship dove into evasive flight, plasma bursts lighting up the dark sky. They both knew what was coming next. The past was no longer behind them. It was chasing them now. The fire had already started by the time they landed. Vetra stepped off the ship first, boots hitting the cracked surface of Kale 3. Smoke curled around her feet, rising from burning towers and broken machines. In the distance, alarms echoed through the dark. Not one, not two, but dozens, maybe hundreds. Something was happening across the planet. Something loud, fast, and full of fury. Jace followed, eyes wide as he took in the chaos. He had seen riots before, but this wasn't a riot. It was a rebellion. The council's banners hung from every building, half burned, torn, or trampled. Groups of alien workers ran through the streets, some armed with stolen rifles, others with nothing but tools. They weren't soldiers, but they were done being quiet. A tall creature with metal plates and wide shoulders ran up to them. Panting, he paused when he saw Vetra, his eyes wide. You, he said. They said you were dead. Vetra didn't respond. She stepped past him, looking around at the flames. Where's the leader of this movement? She asked. The alien pointed toward the center square. There, he said. But you don't want to go near it. Why? Jace asked. Because the council just sent their enforcers. The moment they entered the square, the mood changed. Dozens of beings stood behind barricades. Miners, engineers, traders, even children. They looked tired, hungry, but not afraid. And in front of them stood four armored council enforcers, heavily armed, faces hidden, voices like machines. You are in violation of High Order Code 11. The lead enforcer said, surrender now. No one moved, no one spoke. Then Vetra stepped into view, and everything stopped, even the enforcers. Hesitated, her name spread like fire through the crowd, whispered and shouted. Vetra, she's real, she's here. The enforcers pointed their weapons, target acquired. One of them said, execute immediately. Vetra didn't flinch, she raised her arm, and in one smooth motion, slammed her fist into the ground. The impact cracked the stone, sent a shockwave through the square. One of the enforcers was thrown backward, armor sparking. The others opened fire. But Jace had already ducked behind cover. He pulled a small device from his belt and pressed it. A flashbang burst in the air, blinding light and sound everywhere. In seconds, Vetra was moving again. She tore a weapon from one of the stunned enforcers and used it to crush the last standing one. Silence fell again, but this time it was different. Not fear, not confusion. It was respect. Vetra turned to the crowd. I am not here to rule, she said. I'm here to show you how to stand. No one spoke, but many nodded. The firelight danced in their eyes. Later, in a hidden chamber beneath the old city, Vetra and Jace met with the rebel leaders, a mix of species, once scattered, now united. They had heard of her, of course, but seeing her in person alive, free, and standing beside a human meant something new. Jace placed a holomap on the table. "This is bigger than one planet," he said. "The Council's control is cracking across the outer rim." A lizard-like elder leaned forward. "Why now?" he asked. "What changed?" Jace glanced at Vetra. "She did," he said. Vetra looked at the room, at their tired faces and broken hands. "I didn't come here to lead," she said. "But if you're ready to fight, I'll fight with you." A murmur of agreement passed through the room. One by one, voices joined, louder, stronger. Not shouting her name, not begging for help, but calling for war. Outside, ships landed in the distance, not Council ships, other rebels. Answering the signal, the uprising had begun, not with an army, not with a banner, but with one warrior who had been used for too long, and one human who had smiled when no one else dared. Jace stood beside her. "This is going to spread fast," he said. "They'll come for you." Vetra didn't smile, but her eyes burned like the fires behind her. "Let them," she said. The sky above burned blue as the first enemy ship fell. It didn't explode. It collapsed, folded in half like paper under a hammer. The rebels on the ground cheered, but no one relaxed, because that was only the first. More ships came behind it. Bigger, faster, and angry. At the front of the charge stood Vetra, armor cracked, blade ready, eyes like thunder. Behind her stood beings from 10 different species, not soldiers, not trained, but ready, and beside her, always beside her, stood Jace, holding his rifle like it mattered less than the fire in his chest. He didn't need to be strong. He only needed to be what he had always been, unshaken. Vetra looked at the rising fleet in the sky and gave one command: hold. A message spread across the rebel channels. Not yet. Wait for her signal. Wait for the shield. They didn't know what it meant, but they trusted her, because legends don't need long speeches. In orbit, Council commanders screamed into their comms: break their lines, destroy the giant, take the human alive. But it was already too late. The rebels had spread across 8 systems now. They didn't need approval. They needed something to believe in, and they found it in her. Vetra wasn't giving orders from a screen. She was on the front line, covered in ash, standing between the people and the storm. The first wave hit the surface like a meteor strike. But they were ready. Traps exploded from the ground, anti-air turrets lit the sky. And through the chaos, Vetra ran silent, fast, unstoppable. Jace followed close behind, not just as support, but as her anchor. He reminded her that this fight wasn't just about rage. It was about choice. It was about standing up when the galaxy tells you to kneel. And it was working. Rebel ships broke formation. But not from fear. They split to surround the enemy. Small fighters diving between capital ships like wasps with teeth. The Council expected disorder. They got unity. In the heat of the fight, Jace went down. A blast threw him back into the wreckage of a transport. Vetra saw it. Everything inside her screamed, "Not again. Not this time." She charged forward, slicing through metal and bone. Bullets bounced off her shoulder. Sparks flew from her chest plate. But she didn't slow down. She found Jace behind a broken wing, blood on his forehead, eyes half open. "You came back," he whispered, trying to smile. "Always," she said, voice shaking. She lifted him like he weighed nothing and carried him through the fire. No warrior dared block her path, because in that moment, she wasn't a weapon. She wasn't a threat. She was a fury, a promise made of steel and memory. By nightfall, the skies were quiet again. The enemy fleet had pulled back, retreating into shadows with torn hulls and dead comms. On the ground, rebels gathered in silence, looking at their battered camp, looking at her. She stood beside Jace, who now sat with a bandage over one eye and a grin that didn't quit. She didn't raise her arms, didn't call herself a leader, but the people still cheered, because they knew what she was. She was not just the silent Jonas anymore. She was the one who stood when the galaxy bent, the one who protected a human with no armor, no rank, just heart. Jace leaned closer, voice soft. "You smiled," he said. She blinked. Had she touched her lips, surprised. The rebels shouted her name again, this time not in fear, but in fire. "Vetra, Vetra, Vetra," and she let them, because for once she wasn't standing alone. And when the stars looked down that night, they didn't see a giant or a human or a legend. They saw two souls who dared to change everything. Together,